Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagele. Today is episode 4 of our mini-series on programming. Today we're diving into the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of what sets, reps, rest periods all mean in the grand scheme of a program. And so ultimately with this, I want to help you understand why different set and rep schemes exist, and know when to prescribe a specific set rest scheme. We're going to help to understand how rest periods can change the outcomes of a session and the adaptations that you're attempting to gain from a session, and also allow you to have a weekly practical framework for your set accumulation. And so the whole intent of this series is to stop writing lazy, uniform cookie cutter programs and instead write programs that actually move the needle and work to help drive progress. So every program has sets and reps prescribed next to a movement. And a lot of people understand or think that they understand why those sets and reps are there. But I'd venture to guess that many don't. We see 3x10, and you might see it down the page. You've got back squat 3x10, front squat 3x10, leg extensions 3x10. Or you might see a 3x5 weaved in. You might see rest periods. If you're using a good program, it might have rest periods included, and they might just be 60 seconds straight down, or it might be 3 minutes straight down. But there's nuance to these. A good program should incorporate different rep schemes throughout either a session or at least throughout a block or throughout a block of training or a mesocycle between different phases of training. So I don't want to talk about just memorizing numbers. I don't want to talk about why 3x5 might be better than 3x8 or 4x8 is better than 3x8. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of explaining different viewpoints and mindsets around certain reps and set schemes, but instead of talking about why those numbers exist and allow you to pull that information out to be able to write a program that drives the adaptation you're looking to achieve. If you've been in the gym, you've seen programs, you might kind of understand why 3x10 is more associated with hypertrophy and muscle growth. Or maybe you've heard of 5 sets of 5 and how that's associated with strength. Maybe short rest equals harder, or maybe short rest equals more hypertrophy. You might be aware of these foundational concepts, but there's more behind that. There's more of the mechanisms. If you don't understand why a scheme is written, then you can't adjust for that. Whenever life starts to get hectic, or why your recovery is hampered, or goals have changed. So that's what I want to set the framework for and talk through how sets and reps are instructions and not just a decoration that's been written on your program or on your whiteboard. So a lot of times sets and reps are almost like a traditional thing. One of the most common is 3x10. We'll do every single movement, 3 sets, 10 reps. But truthfully, sets and reps are instructions for your body. They are the stress that's applied to elicit an adaptation. So anytime that you write 3 sets of 10 or 5 sets of 3 or 6 sets of 2, you are deciding how long the muscle works. You're deciding how heavy the load is, the intensity of the weight, how fatigued your body and your central nervous system become, and what adaptation is favored by choosing that scheme. You might have the same exercise with different numbers and different outcomes entirely. The exercise, the movement is the vehicle, but the sets, the reps, the rest periods, those are like the steering wheel. Those are the driver that's operating the vehicle. So first, let's start by breaking down different rep ranges and what adaptations they elicit, what they actually train. So let's start with low reps. Low reps are anything that's probably 1 to 5 repetitions. And these tend to bias force production, neural efficiency, motor unit recruitment, and your ability to perform that movement and that skill under load. These train the nervous system to express strength. Then we can talk about moderate repetitions, 6 reps up to 12 reps. Here, we're going to bias more of that mechanical tension and muscle fiber type fatigue. And at the end of the day, hypertrophy, muscle growth. These train the tissue to grow and to be able to tolerate work. And then last, we have higher repetitions. Anything that's 13 up to 100 that I've seen. I've never really seen a program 101 repetitions, but up to probably 100, or maybe we go by time. But nonetheless, higher repetitions, anything above 13. These train muscular endurance and local fatigue resistance. So how resistant and how resilient can a specific muscle group get under a lot of fatigue? And then they also tend to have a conditioning carryover. So they might start to train some of those aerobic fiber types. Now, rep ranges don't lock in adaptation, but they can tilt the outcome. You could do 5 reps, but if you're using a very submaximal load, those 5 reps aren't going to do anything. Same thing with 12 reps. You can do 12 reps, but if you're choosing a intensity or a weight, a load on the bar that's too low, you're not going to hit those outcomes that we talked about with that mechanical tension and the muscle fiber fatigue. So we want to talk through those as well, and intensity certainly matters, but if we know where and why these rep schemes tend to come into play, then that allows us to start to see the bigger picture. So now I'm going to actually get into some rep schemes, because 3x5 is a commonly programmed rep scheme, and so is 3 sets of 10. So strength isn't built through fatigue. It's built through repeated high-quality force production. At the end of the day, the bottom line is strength is going to care more about how hard each rep was than how tired you got by doing that set and how tired you feel afterward. So now let's push a little bit further. Let's go 10 sets of 3 and 3 sets of 10. Both equal 30 reps. But in terms of the adaptation, they're not even close to what you're going to get out of that. So let's start with 10 sets of 3. Here we're doing 10 high-quality exposures to a heavier weight. We're minimizing our fatigue per set, and we're also able to train with higher intent every single rep, which, end of the day, we get better motor learning, better muscle recruitment, better high threshold motor recruitment, and ultimately more strength. Now let's look at 3 sets of 10. Now we're doing fewer quality reps. Fatigue is going to start to accumulate, and it's going to dominate as that set continues, which is going to lead to lower force output and more sloppy execution. With 10 sets of 3, we're doing more sets closer to failure than we are with 3 sets of 10. And so when we reframe sets and look at reps as a duration and sets as the number of opportunities, that then allows us to program more effectively. With strength work, we want to increase our chances of adaptation by practicing more quality sets and more quality repetitions than chasing exhaustion or chasing fatigue. So now let's look at set structure. We've already talked a little bit about this, and I used 3 sets of 10 and 10 sets of 3 as an example. But for strength work, we want to increase our sets before we increase the reps in that set. This allows us to preserve repetition quality and allow us to control and manage our fatigue better. Common sets and rep schemes are 6 sets of 3, 5 sets of 3, 8 sets of 3. If we're training strength, we don't want to be doing 3 sets of 10 or 12 or 15. Again, we're doing way too many reps that are going to fatigue us, and we're doing way too few sets close to failure, close to high threshold motor unit recruitment activity. Now let's flip the scales. For hypertrophy, now moderate sets and moderate reps dominate. Fatigue with hypertrophy is acceptable, and volume should drive the adaptation. A lot of strength programs look very boring, and they look long. If we're talking 10 sets of 3, not that I would program that very often, but if we're doing 10 sets of 3, think about the rest in between each of those sets. We might be doing 30 minutes of just that one movement. Hypertrophy programs, on the other hand, a little bit of fatigue is acceptable. And those should feel hard. Those should get a little bit more of the burn. You should feel a little bit tired after a hypertrophy session. And you should feel more sore the next day because we're training different adaptations and different responses within the body. They have different goals and entirely different structure. So now rest periods. Rest periods are determined by what the outcome is or what we want the outcome to be. And they also determine whether reps stay and within kind of the framework or the paradigm of where you think they should. So short rest, I would say short rest is anything under 90 seconds. This is going to lead to incomplete energy recovery. If we're looking at big lifts, back squat, bench press, we're going to get slower bar speed. And we're going to start to turn our strength work into conditioning, or at least limit the ability to train strength optimally. Longer rest, on the other hand, and I would say anything from 90 seconds, I've programmed up to 6 minutes of rest in between sets, helps to preserve force output and maintain rep quality, and ultimately support strength and power adaptations. With strength, we need enough rest between sets to replenish ATP, to replenish our substrate, to be able to repeat that force and that movement again with high quality. Now with hypertrophy, we're using typically lower weight on the bar, and that mechanical stress, that fatigue that we feel is acceptable. So we can tolerate shorter rest periods to almost increase the fatigue that we feel. So we might be doing the same reps, we might be doing the same sets, but different rest can equal different adaptations and different outcomes. Now let's talk about weekly set accumulation. How many sets or exposures do we need of a movement throughout the course of the week? And so these should be hard, meaningful working sets that are close to failure to be able to matter. And how many for a specific muscle group or movement. Now with these, I don't count warm-ups unless we're training like back down sets. But ultimately, why weekly sets matter more than daily sets is because we don't adapt to one workout. We adapt to the repeated exposures across the week, across the block. And so how we distribute those matters as much as total count as well. If we say we're going to train 9 sets for a body part and we do all 9 sets on one day, now we have 6 days before we hit that again that it's not being exposed to that stressor. So for our strength focused work, good spot to be is around 6 to 12 hard sets every single week. And we'll try to spread that across 2 to 4 sessions. These are low reps. These are long rest periods, but these are what drive those neural adaptations. And they don't need a lot of volume. We don't need fatigue. We need to just be consistently exposed. With hypertrophy-focused muscles, now we're looking at 10 to 16 hard sets per week. Sometimes we can go higher if you're a little bit more advanced. We're using moderate repetitions. We're using moderate rest. But we want the muscle to grow, and how it grows is by responding to that volume. Recovery with hypertrophy work is what's more of the limiter. Now, more isn't always better. Most plateaus aren't caused by undertraining. They're actually under-recovering. Signs that volume is too high is that you're regressing in your strength, or you're persistently getting sore. Your joints are barking at you. They're getting irritated. You're starting to lose motivation to go to the gym. These are all signs of a high volume load on your body. Now, signs that volume may be too low is that you don't feel challenged. You don't feel like you're progressing. You don't feel a pump, or you don't feel moderately sore after those sessions. Or maybe you don't feel moderately fatigued from a central standpoint. So these are all things to watch for and look for, because every single individual's tolerance to volume is different. But ultimately, those numbers there are good, solid starting points for most everyday athletes. So now, how do we choose? Okay, we're sitting down, we're writing a program, we've got our notebook out or our Excel tab open. So 3 sets of 5. We should choose that whenever we're trying to train strength. These are examples. Again, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of memorizing which set rep schemes work, but 3 by 5, that low rep, moderate volume, that's where strength is the priority. Load progression matters with this type of movement, so we're wanting to add weight to the bar. And we also want to make sure that our technique is maintained throughout that entire set. We have to be able to control fatigue. We have to be able to control the movement. That's for strength. 3 by 5, think strength. 5 by 5, think strength. Now, 3 by 10, on the other hand, is when hypertrophy is the goal. When muscle growth is our main priority, when we want a lot of time under tension to be able to just grow that muscle. Okay, we're okay. We're accepting fatigue with this. We're accepting a little bit more soreness because now we've got way more eccentric movement. We're doing way more repetitions, and we're accumulating a lot more volume over the course of the week or over the course of that set. With hypertrophy work, load progression tends to take a backseat. Okay, we're not, especially like think about arms, right? I always joke whenever people say like add 5 pounds. If you added 5 pounds on bicep curls every week, you'd be curling like 200 pounds, but it's not possible. So load progression doesn't matter. It's the constant exposures. The more volume that we can accumulate, the more frequency that we can accumulate, the better response and adaptation we're going to have with our hypertrophy work. Now, neither is better. They're better for their individual ones. They solve different problems. The mistake that a lot of programs will make, a lot of coaches will make, a lot of personal trainers will make, is that they just use one scheme for everything. They write a workout and they just write 3 by 10 next to every single movement. And that's a massive problem, because ideally within that program, you should have different adaptations and different outcomes that are more appropriate for that movement being selected and more appropriate for the individual who's performing those movements. Now, good programs, on the other hand, they assign reps by the role of the movement. They assign sets by the adaptation that movement in that session is looking to achieve, and they assign rest intentionally. A lot of programs leave rest out entirely. If you're reading your program or you're currently doing a program and there's no rest included in there, then the coach was lazy and didn't include that work. Rest is important and it matters. That's how real programming is done. That's how real coaches should program for their athletes and for their clients. So to wrap this up, sets decide how often, how many exposures. Reps decide how long. How long are we going to put that muscle under this stress? And rest decides how well. How well are we going to be able to do the movement? The weekly volume ultimately decides whether you adapt at all. If it's too low, no adaptation. If it's too high, we're going to overtrain, no adaptation. If you understand these 4 things, then you can now adjust your own programs intelligently. You can be able to modify and train through different stressors throughout your life. And you can make progress without becoming way too burnt out and way too bored with your programming. The body doesn't just respond to intention. It responds to what you are able to repeat and what stressors that you can apply to it. So thanks for listening to the Everyday Strength Podcast. If today's episode helped you learn something, do me a favor and make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. This helps the show grow and it ensures that you never miss an episode. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment. I read all of them. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, then a quick 5-star review goes a long way in pushing this information to more people. If you want to go deeper, then join the Performance Edge Network. It's free to join and it gets you access to my weekly newsletter, which is full of training breakdowns, physiology deep dives, and tools that you can apply immediately to become a stronger, fitter, higher performing everyday athlete. And if you're ready for structured programming, then I've got options for whatever path you're on. The Peak Performance Training Program is my flagship strength and conditioning program. And I also offer Peak 3X, which is a 3-day per week version for busier athletes, along with other programs designed for hybrid competitors, runners, and anyone who wants to train like an athlete year round. You can find all those and more at HageleStrength.com. I appreciate you being here. Keep training hard, and I'll see you in the next episode.